Hi, everyone. On behalf of the 92nd Street, I want to welcome you to this conversation with the award-winning chef, restaurateur, and television personality, Marcus Samuelsson, about the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on the restaurant industry and what reopening is going to look like, in addition to any other issues we want to get into. Welcome, Marcus.
Thank you very much, Amanda, for having me.
Of course. So I wanted to start by just laying the groundwork and giving context for the audience as to what your restaurant portfolio looks like and how many employees you have and the changes you had to make in March, right when it hit and cities started shutting down.
Right. Well, first I want to say thank you to 92nd Street Y. I've had the great pleasure to be on stage, both uptown and downtown. And I remember particularly one time I did it with Anthony Bourdain uptown. And it also happened to be one of the nights that I got 3 stars from New York Times. So I was very nervous and Tony was messing with me the whole time. So I just remember that. I was laughing at that. So yeah, I mean, this is a pivotal moment in American history for many reasons. But when COVID started to sort of enter the restaurant world, I would say was the last week of February, the first week of March, sometimes around that. We were operating in 8 countries. Obviously in New York and Harlem being the hub, but in Four Seasons in Montreal, we have a beautiful fish restaurant called Marcus. We have in Caribbean islands as well, and London and in Scandinavia. So that first week of March, I kind of wanted to throw my phone away because it was just, what do you do in at least 4 or 5 different languages? And I say that also because it also showcased how different America runs than those. Canada has a healthcare system that works. So does Scandinavia, and even the UK, and also have an unemployment system that works. So it actually was easier to furlough and talk about responsibilities in these other countries, although they're further away, than it was right here at home. And then also, you don't have the same level of deep tissue poverty that we have to deal with here. So I know we like to think about America as a first world country and as a leading country in the world, but it's also equally a third world country. And it's very important to think about that. And that leaves us a lot of room to improve over.
And so what did you do to change the model of these restaurants? I know some you turned into community kitchens, some did you shut down outright for the time being?
Yeah, it was a combination. I mean, quite frankly, with our restaurant in Newark, Harlem, and Overtown, and we're a week away from opening in Overtown in Miami, with plan of creating jobs in predominantly African-American iconic neighborhoods like Overtown, like Newark and Harlem, we know right away that these neighborhoods going to be hit much, much harder. I live in Harlem and I walk 5 minutes to my restaurant. So every day I see, I walk 5 minutes east of me. I'm in the middle of a big housing project. I walk 3 minutes west. I'm next to Maya Angelou's brownstone. You know what I mean? That's kind of America in a nutshell. But it also opens the eyes for me directly to see the different sort of valleys and what are the opportunities to improve on. And I knew that we had to change. And calling Jose Andres, if you think about restaurant, core word means to restore your community. And what is a chef? It's really, you link people together from all aspects, right? From purveyors, from customers to staff. This was the time, this was my pivotal moment to say, okay, if you're a chef with this platform, you have to start reaching out. And I started to reach out to Jose Andres and World Central Kitchen. And I called a lot of different people that could help us to raise money. We raised the money in a couple of weeks. So far, we raised over $4 million. Wow. And we served 100,000 meals between Newark Overtown, and just between Newark and Harlem, actually.
Wow. And that effort is continuing now.
It's continuing, and 2 weeks into it, we started to build on. We said we can't, Amanda. We served 1,000 meals a day, and the line we could have served 2,000. So as soon as World Central Kitchen really found out on that they were like, okay, we got to continue, and we started to raise money and activate 10 other restaurants in Harlem to serve 200 to 300 portions as well each, which means that we get up to 4,000 people in Harlem a day being served. That really does three things, and they're really important. It serves the neediest and the first responders. It also allows us to hire staff back, people who really need to work in a safe way. And then thirdly, it helped the very broken infrastructure, the food infrastructure that was completely broken between purveyors and restaurants, because, in the deepest of this, 80% of all restaurants in America were closed. So think about farmers had to start burning food. In Newark, it was a little bit different. Audible, we had, Don Katz that started Audible, reached out right away, and he helped out to help us raise the money. But the same structure there. 10 restaurants in Newark are involved, and we're serving about 3,000 meals a day in Newark alone. So it's important.
So the idea with groups like World Central Kitchen is that the government will give them money so they can give it to restaurants to feed the needy. Do you see that extending after the epidemic is over and restaurants are back open again? Is there a world in which these spaces can still be activated for this kind of work?
I think there's a blend between private and public sector have to step up, because restaurants are retail, right? But we have 11 million restaurant workers about in this country. I would say 40% right now are unemployed. But it's not just the restaurant workers, right? It's all the other jobs that the restaurant creates. So it's about 16 million people, right? That depends on restaurants. So you can't just, what do you want to say? All that sector is going to be unemployed. And when you take away a restaurant from a neighborhood, you also take away all other retail, right? So goes that nail salon that you like. We were talking about going to a barbershop or going to a hairdresser. That stuff's going to be gone. So you're probably talking about 30, 40 million people being unemployed for a long time. So the government has to step in. We have to, and they have, but I don't think it's going to be the last time, and it's going to continue. My friend in Newark here that operates a restaurant, he said to me, Marcus, Newark just came back from the 1968 protesters, and that's how long it stays in underserved communities, because it's just not COVID, right? It's also bigger than COVID. It's the systemic racism that are in those communities that we have to operate at the same time.
Right. So with the programs in place with the government as they stand now, what is your outlook for restaurants? Like right now, there's the Paycheck Protection Program. Is that enough? What needs to be done?
I think there have to be a couple of more. The fact that we got the really through the work of Independent Restaurant Coalition, we got the loan period extended, great, but that just moved the goalpost. There needs to be a couple. We need more help. When end of the day, you need short-term fixes, but you also need long-term fixes, and there's some basic stuff that needs to happen, right? What's incredible in America is we can send somebody to the moon and back, but we are very cautious about investing in our own people, particularly if they're Black and brown, right? So what we need, I know it's not a direct answer to your question, but healthcare system that all the other countries in the world that we like to compare ourselves with figure it out circa 1947, basically 2-3 years after the Second World War, right? So their version has been worked on for 50 years, for 75 years or so, right? We need to figure out unemployment, real system around unemployment. right? And it does not have to be done through small businesses. It can actually, that's actually what government is supposed to do, right? So government that governs would be great. It would be a great start, right? And so those are two small things that are not small things, that actually, because you have numbers now that shows why COVID will stay in urban America longer than it will stay somewhere else, right? So these are real issues that's going to come back at us in many different ways, right? So I think there's a number of things, but I would like to start with a government that governs, and it's not sarcastically, we need it more than ever.
Right. And I know that you wrote a piece for us about your regulars and how they've shifted, and how pre-COVID there was a certain kind of regular, and then once you became a community kitchen, a soup kitchen, that regular shifted, and then as the pandemic went on, it shifted again. Can you talk about those different types of people that are coming to Red Rooster specifically?
Yes. So every day, we, the 8-9 years, and even the 5 years before I opened Red Rooster, I moved up here after a catastrophic event, the biggest one in American history, 9/11. That was really the turning point for me to move to Harlem, in search of a community. And the years between post 9/11 and opening Red Rooster, I was really researching and learning and listening to, reading James Baldwin, going to Schomburg, and really studying who was my community. And I had some amazing teachers that taught me a lot about the community. And it was important for me to hire from the community, serve that community. But it also, there was a segment that I missed. And it was a lot of homeless people that I didn't reach out to. And it wasn't until the pandemic, we have a lot of programs before that we worked on, that we gave out turkeys during Thanksgiving and so on. But on a day-to-day basis, there was a big population that I missed. And that blind spot didn't really open up to me until COVID. Right. When we started with World Central Kitchen, the first segment of the line was homeless communities. And it works on many different ways, right? Randall's Island has a homeless community. They get bussed into 125th and Lenox every day. So they actually became our first customer. And 2 weeks in the pandemic, they started to become people that clearly was on the job market before, maybe just got laid off. Maybe they were a bartender or a cook at another restaurant. And we try to practice social distancing, and you could tell that the people have been homeless or lived in shelters. They know how to wait much better than someone that is out of that system, right? So there was actually a lot of kinship that was happening in the line. And just hang on, man. It's going to just take another 10 minutes, and a lot of patience and a lot of that stuff. And then the last leg to the lines was maybe 5 weeks into it, 6 weeks into it. And it became much more diverse. It actually, quite frankly, it just got wider. And it felt more, people came, pulled up in their cars and started waiting online. And I don't see a shame in that at all. I just think that, okay, the need is real. Professionals lost their job, and they came and looked at us as a place of comfort. And I really appreciate that. But the back and forth with the regulars are still the same. They were pushing me. It's like, hey, chef, I like the chicken better yesterday.
Right.
Or
change up the menu.
Yeah, I'm like, how come I don't get the apple I had yesterday? And it's like this back and forth, which still goes on. And as a cook, you just want a line. You just want people to interact with.
Has it changed how you fundamentally approach the idea of hospitality and what your purpose is with these restaurant spaces?
Yes, I want to say yes. And I'm working through how I can actually extend that. I always thought that, coming from Africa and having that extension, I always felt very close to poverty. I've seen it, I lived it, I go back to it often. But a lot of this is also through either mental health or drug use. We have a methadone center 2 blocks away from the restaurant, and they come up. And I've had a blind spot for that. And it's just better to work through that. And what is our role? We do a lot of things through Harlem Meet Up in our restaurant, of course, but it's helping either elderly or it's helping people who can't come to the restaurant in certain ways. This is a whole other slice of the population, and
Right.
we have to continue in some phase of fashion to continue this work.
And how do you look at the actual business side of it and surviving as a business in all these different cities if you have to work at 25% capacity, 50% capacity, if you have to put all these measures in place? Like, is it doable for you? Do you have to make a shift?
Yes, we have to pivot. You know, if I think about post-COVID 2000, let's say January 2020,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we're back at that until maybe 2 years. You know what I
Right.
mean? And not sure even if we're back at that capacity, because maybe then we have 10% unemployment. Well, I don't know what the number, you know, there's other things that's going to happen. Just like, you know, you have to think about post the war, people come back and, you know, there's other 100% directed, but non-directed things that comes around that, right? You know, post Iraq, we had in Afghanistan, we had a lot of mental health issues and eventually opioid crisis and stuff like that you cannot maybe direct, but there's a link there. So I think there will be other links here: unemployment, depression, all of these different things. So it's going to take a long time to come back. I know I'm very positive in terms of restaurant and bringing people together, but I don't think we're going to be back at that run for a very long time.
I've heard some chefs talking about how restaurant owners now need to be diversifying their portfolios or their businesses by launching products or getting into television or other ways of making money. Do you think that's a good idea? Is that realistic for most people? Or do you have other advice for restaurant owners in the audience who want to figure out how to get through this?
I think you have to be a super entrepreneur. This is a moment to be entrepreneurial, and everyone has something, right? If you open a restaurant, if you open a food truck, whatever it is in the space, you have a drive that is stronger than most people, right? And that's the moment that now is the call of that moment to call for that. So it might, you know, TV might be that you start something on Instagram and it grows, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why not? That's what a lot of people start a great idea that way. You got to find an audience and you got to communicate. And this is a crisis moment. This might be once in a generation crisis moment. So, you know, yes, you have to connect with an audience, and how you connect with the audience will look different for each restaurant. But I think this is the time that you have to do that, absolutely, because it's going to be rough. It's hard.
When you think about Red Rooster specifically and how much that restaurant is dependent on people getting together and, I don't know, being in a music venue and being in that upstairs space where it's all a bar and talking across the bar, how do you even think about what that's going to look like, at least in the first phase of this?
Well, we're in kind of the first phase right now, right, where we are allowed to do takeout, and it's been very much a stop and start. It started with the curfew,
Mm-hmm.
and then you think about now it started again, and then the governor shut us down on Sunday and today. And so it's a lot of stops and starts, and we have to reimagine what that is. But, you know, if anyone can do it, I know we can do it. And I believe in my team, because it's the same team that signed up to be part of this journey. And it's also the same team that was there during Hurricane Sandy or post really tough snowstorms. And it was the same team that said, you know, March 9th, when we started with working with World Central Kitchen, even before people knew if we had masks or gloves, it's like, we're in, right? So we've gone through so much together. So I know that if anyone can do it, I'm always going to bet on our team. Not giving you any guarantees that it's going to be the same, but I think it's a little bit humble walk for a while. We'll start, we might find out that that didn't work out. Then we
Right.
have to go back. And my goal and intent is before we close, the day before we close, we had 180 employees, 70 musicians that call Red Rooster home. Think about all the other, like the purveyors and all of that on top of that, right? My goal is to get back to that number. It took me 9 years to get to that number. It probably will take me 3 years at least to get back to that number. But I'm a chef for life. I don't have an exit strategy. Like this is my contribution. This is what we do. And there's going to be great years and there's going to be some down years. And I've started other things. I started a podcast called This Moment, which is it's going to launch this week and starting in Sweden. It's going to launch everywhere. But it was really talking about my friend and I. He's a rapper in Sweden. He's American but lives in Sweden, and we both have African descent. What happens to two creatives when every door is shut on you?
Right.
We both parents, and I entertain in my restaurant. He performs in front of the stage, and it really started with him and me talking, and and then we went from that to, of course, the marches and Black Lives Matters and everything that have happened. I'm saying that because in the worst of times, sometimes the most important work can get done. I know that Red Rooster in Overtown have connected with Miami in a way that we never thought we could imagine to connect. So we are more part of the community in Overtown in Miami in a different way than we would have been if we just would have opened traditionally. Not saying that's a good thing. I'm just acknowledging that in creative work, you can't plan everything. This happened. We had to fight through it. I'm extremely privileged to be able to do it and have a tribe with me that are willing to fight with me.
Are there any other, I don't want to say silver linings, but things that have come up that you weren't expecting from having to do different kinds of work, like in your day-to-day life? I'm sure your schedule is wildly different than it was in January.
Yeah, the biggest silver lining is that my son and I, we have our morning routine, and dad is not just somebody that comes in when he's asleep and sometimes gone when he wakes up. So that's been amazing too. He's almost 4 and just spent this time, and I'm like, what did you do all this time? Do you know what I mean? So that's been amazing for me. There's so many things that I've been able to connect, building this very often from our basement. He's there. He's part of the podcast this moment because he's in the back sometimes. Right. I didn't want to edit that out. Why not? This is, and he's been with me in many things around walking to Red Rooster. He walked with me in one of the marches 2 weeks ago. We had a protest march, I want to say 2 Saturdays ago. He came with me, at least for the beginning part of that, right? So there's real moments here that as a father, son, and family that I know I wouldn't have been possible otherwise. So there's definitely stuff.
And you mentioned the difference between the United States and other countries in terms of the social safety net, but what about the reopening? Is it going smoother for some of your other properties than it is here, or is it all just different depending on the city?
I mean, I would say probably Sweden, because Sweden didn't shut down in the same way, which made it come back a little bit easier. But I mean, there's so many different, Amanda, I also find it's kind of absurd also sometimes to talk about restaurant, because the biggest pandemic we haven't solved. We will solve COVID.
Right.
But there's a much bigger virus that we as Americans have to solve. And food can have a major part of this. If people in the food culture can have a major part of this. And it's the virus of racism, right? And it's playing right in front of our eyes. So it's an historical American time right now so we will open our restaurants but as a person of color, as a Black man, that worries me more, talking to my son about this, how he's going to interact. He loves running in the park. He loves watching birds. He loves police officers. They're much cooler than chefs.
Right.
At some point, I have to tell him, you know what? That guy, the Ray that is in the park that always so nice to you, when you're about 10, 12, you probably shouldn't say hi to him anymore. Like
Right.
these things we have to fix. We can do that. We really should. That for me, it's I choose to live in this country and I'm very privileged to live here, but we have to fix that.
So the racism that we're dealing with has been in this country for so long. Have the protests given you new hope that we can find change?
What gives me hope is that when I was growing up, in like a lot of us, we look at pictures from the 60s and sit-ins and all of that, the commitments from the African American population. And I wouldn't think about it. I'm a Black immigrant. I have the privilege to be here because of the civil rights movement, right? And what gives me hope today is that it is televised and it's much more diverse. And the fact that we get help from our fellow Americans, and that gives me hope that there is truly a youth movement and everybody's coming together, but it's a much more diverse, and that is the reason why it's going to be walked over the finish line. It's not like America actually cares for Black people. They've had a long time to readjust that. So the only reason why people care is really two simple reasons: because it's televised, otherwise, because the stories are the same, but now people, and because they see their own daughters and sons marching. And so I see a lot of hope in that. And it's also beautiful to see, these are all Obama's kids. So I know that it's very frustrating for 45, but reality, this is Obama's generation, right? They're out there doing it. They were in middle school, they were in high school when President Obama was in office. And this is incredible to see a unified America, and I just hope that it leads to real change. And you saw it today in the Supreme Court. There are changes that are happening, and I think they're all connected.
Can you talk about how the restaurant community can help the protesters in this moment, like small things they could do, but also what restaurant owners, especially white restaurant owners, should be doing in the long term to help the Black community, what they are missing in all this or have been missing?
Well, I think that I think it's important to reflect, how did we get here, right? And then what can I do today that improves tomorrow, right? If you're in a position of leadership and higher, ask yourself, what type of culture do you want to set in your organization and your customer base, right? You want it to reflect America. So what efforts are you doing to giving leaderships and positions to Black people and people of color or marginalized people, regardless of sexuality or regardless of race? That is one. Two, if you're just a consumer, support Black businesses. But also think about history, right? Black food is actually essentially the mother of all food because it came from Africa. Not only did it come from Africa, but most of the food that came from Africa, was the identity of it has been taken away, right? And I'm going to give you two very simple examples. If you want to buy chocolate, you're buying Belgian chocolate. Now, where in Brussels is the cocoa bean? Right? If you're buying coffee, you're talking about, Lulu, you're talking about that, yeah, this is a star of all. This is my son. This is talking this one. So if you want to buy coffee, you talk about French roast, you talk about Italian coffee. Coffee comes from, starting point is Ethiopia. Foie gras come from Egypt. So all things, high and lows, is taken out, right? So that changes ownership money, financial, but it also changes aspirations,
Mhm.
right? Then when the chefs, and talk about black farmers and black cooks, this country was built on black farmers. They were called slaves.
Right.
So it's not like we don't know, that this hasn't happened. Who cooked for Thomas Jefferson? He had two young executive chefs. One was Fanny and one was Edu. You know what their age was when they were executive chefs? 15 and 18. So think about if you're an executive chef at 15 and 18, you maybe started to work at 4 full time. And of course, it wasn't called executive chefs.
Right.
So this is the journey of what black entrepreneurs done throughout the years. It's also, you can take pause and actually acknowledge that, right? There is an acknowledgement. There is, and if you're in a position higher, really figure this out. What type of business do you want to create? And in terms of supporting Black-owned businesses.
And I think there's also racism when it comes to business funding and getting your business off the ground. So it's the storytelling around, Black cuisine in America, but also then people are facing these challenges in terms of getting the funding, getting the network together and the resources together, and getting the media attention and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, we're the only country where I, as an immigrant, had access to capital, but not me as a Black person.
Right.
We're the only country in the world, as a Black person, you cannot get capital. But as an, so that is a whole other. But I want to, yes, you can do these things. Racism doesn't. To understand racism, you have to kind of think about it from 4 or 5 different levels, right? Racism is not just the act of calling somebody the N-word. That racism almost doesn't exist anymore. That's not relevant, right? Racism worked in terms of institutional, systemic, interregression, right? Those are, even there's a bias where someone who can never connect with self because they don't say the act, right? I think Amy Cooper is a really big example how a lot of racism work. It's quiet.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a racist. I listen to Prince.
Is this the woman who called the cops on the Blackbird watcher in Central Park?
I am, I'm living on my side. All of those things, right? But at a time, I can use the police force as a weapon. You can't. We can get out of these situations 2 different ways. So the ism, it's not that. There's many that you have to think about it structurally. Think about how media works. How many people of color are in leaderships in media, right? Yeah. And it doesn't mean that those people who got hired one by one ever have any of those isms, but they might not have helped to change. I mean, it's something that I really appreciate to working with Vox. I know how much you guys actually work inside out on this, right?
And it's still ongoing, and there's still.
But I mean, I know it's not perfect, but I do know that there's an inside-outside push that it's really, really hard on this. Sonia has contributed amazing. Osai has contributed amazing. There's a lot of writers that are pushing, and I know it wasn't easy for them to push, but they're doing it. So it's an inside-outside game you have to have on this.
Right, absolutely, and I think so many people think of racism as a binary, like I either am or I'm not, and not of a spectrum as maybe I'm here on the spectrum versus here, and that there are so many things that contribute to how you could be acting in a racist way and not know about it, or just not educate yourself enough.
No, the interregression, and then that's why, for example, there's also great stops, right? Like the other day I saw that the Syria Cop's going to get away from television. I think fantastic. Yeah. Right. Those are like over 30 years, you show basically the same images. So when a police officer then gets to that moment, the image is already, or that Amy Cooper, the image of who is the villain is already set, right? So these are the tiny, tiny things that over years builds up to this. But anyway, I think one thing that I love about America, you can be in the toughest spot, but it also keeps working on itself and it realize it's an imperfect country, but making change is hard. And I'm really proud to see what's happening. Around 2,000 cities this weekend, Americans from all backgrounds protested. And I know that the person that works on 1600 Black Lives Matter Plaza, very, very nervous about that. But you know what? A change is going to come.
Right. I think the protests have shown just how angry everyone is. And I think, to your point, the diversity of it is hugely important, because it's showing like this is not just one group of people. This is everyone in America getting together, in every town and city, and whether it's liberal or conservative, people are speaking out. So I think hopefully it does lead to change. It's just what can an everyday restaurateur, chef do to really help? And I think your point that hiring is a big thing.
But you know, people are taking it seriously. So I worked for 25 years in this country as a chef. Last week, I got bombarded with different questions, and people ask me from all sides of the aisle, right? And all my, as a Black person, you live a dual life. So all my, not all, but a lot of my white chef friends from all over the country called me, what can I do? And then, Kwame and I texted, Carla and I talked to each other. Then I called Naisha, and then I called Mashama. Then Nina texted me, and JJ and I was talking, and Elbasi all the time. So I was like, stop. We have to do something rather than just having this. And they were equally tired of this, because as a Black person, you realize you want to help, but how do I help? But it's also on other people. So, Independent Restaurant Coalition, we came together and we decided, let's do a panel. And the panel was amazing. People cried, So 10 of us, all those chefs that I mentioned, plus Greg and Eduardo from the West Coast, we hosted a panel about Black chefs that we all explained our narrative and our journey. And we had to cut it off at, I think it was 300 or 400 people at that,
Wow.
And we could have gone to 600-700 people, but whatever. The interest is there, and the feedback has been amazing. And for me, thank you, REC, for setting the table, and thank you for the chefs to showing interest. And I said, listen, we are not your diversity class. You don't come to this and check the box. If you guys are not doing your next pop-up with Mashama, if you're not hiring your next sous chef and calling Nina who that's going to be, this is not working. Then we charge you instead. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're here because we want to help out, but this panel is here for a reason, and we're lucky in the community that we have each other. But if you're going to train to have a change, you can't just say, I zoomed in and I was in a Zoom call. No. All these chefs, you guys employ thousands of people, plus use celebrity chefs on our huge platform and set the tonality across the country. You want to be part of change? This is your opportunity. And it was magical. It was really, but it's never happened, right? So I'm like, this needs to happen more.
Like, why did it take this? Yeah.
Exactly.
I do love that it was with the Independent Restaurant Coalition, because that group was founded as a response to COVID. Because I think when COVID hit, the industry realized we don't have a leadership group here. We don't have a group that's really fighting for independent restaurants. And now that this group is formed, there are so many uses for it.
So many things, Amanda, comes from a time of crisis, right?
Yeah.
And it's, Antifa really came during the Second World War against the Germans, right? And you're going to hear a lot about it. People are going to hear a lot about Antifa for the next 6 months. But I'm just saying, so many organizations were started out of a chaos, right? Like, on a lighter note, Tribeca Film Festival was started right after 9/11 because nobody, Robert De Niro and the team really wanted people to come back to Tribeca. So, I can tell you, Harlem Meet Up was started because we really felt there was a crisis that people didn't come to Harlem in the same way as they came to other parts of Manhattan. But out of that, we were able to turn something negative to something positive, right? So there's always these dire times. If you can just work through it, out of that, some amazing time can come as well. And we haven't turned the corner yet. We're still in it. But I'm also very positive about what can happen for our industry.
I love that. So to the audience, I do have more questions for Marcus, but if you have any questions, now's the time to put them in the comment section and we can talk about your questions for Marcus. But otherwise we will keep going. What other uses do you see for that leadership group now that it does exist? Because so long the community was just, every man and woman for themselves. And I think the big group was lobbying for fast food chains and major restaurant groups. Like what actions would you like that coalition to take on?
Well, I think, first of all, Andrew and Will started, like you said, 10 years ago, 10 weeks ago, 11 weeks ago. So it's very young, but it's big. So they really hit a nerve that we need in our industry. And I think these issues will continue to come up. So I hope it can be a group that really talks about marginalized people in our industry and push those things to the forefront. And if it leads to even more diverse hospitality scene, fantastic. That's how you know if it's working, right? And I really believe so. I think starting something is always hard and figuring out how big it's going to be. But I know that they're working really, really hard because I'm in on the calls, and I know that more and more questions are coming up. So give it 6 months, and I think they've already established even more than their identity in terms of leadership and in terms of game-changing things for industry. And Amanda, like starting back up the restaurant, you can almost forget the date. It's going to be super hard. You can open whatever you want, whatever date you want. It doesn't mean that the customers are ready to come back. So I think we're going to need Independent Restaurant Coalition more than ever once we open back. And what happens if you get a second wave of this, right?
Right.
So there's so many things that I know that we going to need Independent Restaurant Coalition for. What that might be, I don't know yet, but I do know there's going to be people that in our industry, good people, hardworking people, that's going to need help and representation.
Well, I think to your point at the beginning, there are so many problems with the United States that affect restaurant workers and restaurant owners in an outsized way. So our healthcare system, our unemployment system, any kind of social safety net, like I think restaurant workers are one of the most vulnerable populations we have.
Sure. And it's very simple because the government is putting on the onus also of the ownership of small business to take care of it versus being a government issue. Like in America, people pay tax and people pay a lot of tax. But we commit a lot of that to war and other things. In most other countries, they commit to, they just have a different approach on that. You know what I mean? They're not geared up for Cold War. They might be geared up for more contemporary things and contemporary challenges, And then you obviously have the brilliant Americans that take pride in not paying taxes.
Right.
Yeah.
And
it's the thing.
And the it's not really a bailout what they did create for restaurants in that it's loans. And so you've seen in other recessions, there were actual bailouts, and now there are loans with major strings attached. And I know of restaurateurs who just decided they would rather close down than take on what could be a burdensome loan. I don't know if you've been hearing about that as well.
Amanda, but it's also about, and that's why it's so important what platforms like Eater and other platforms are writing too. It's also about getting in the room, because how is it that restaurants that have 16 million workers in this country, we get one lump sum of loan, and let's say other industries, let's say Boeing, that I think employs about 143,000 people, get enormous amount of bailout, but the total hospitality industry gets much, much, much less, right? So it's also about lobbying access and respect. And you know, there's a lot of industry that doesn't employ as many people as the hospitality industry, because we're independent and small for the majority, and don't have the pipeline into Congress. We get poo-pooed on instead, you know, and so anyway, this is a big step forward. We have a long way to go, and I know that we're going to continue to fight and work hard at it, you know.
Right. Which of your restaurants is opening first in the United States? Do you know, in terms of in-room dining?
Well, we opened for takeout in New York. Just opened this last week. Supposed to open 2 weeks ago, but then we got shut down for them because of you know, there was just this start and stop with the curfew and all of that stuff, right? Then Overtown is opening on Friday. We're opening for takeout. And then I think Florida will be before, Florida, Overtown will open before New York. Yeah, it will be for sit down. Yeah.
Do you think this makes you cautious before expanding? Like, does it make you, do you think it will hamper innovation and this entrepreneurial drive that pushes the restaurant industry and small business forward?
I think those are two different questions. I don't think it will actually hamper innovation, because innovation and entrepreneurship can come out of a very difficult time. But I do think if we think about restaurant in the traditional form, yes, right? Yeah. But retail will have a very difficult time. But I do think innovation will come out of it, and it's just about how do you connect, you know? So I don't know, maybe you know, you think about if you go back 10 years ago, 15 years ago, what food trucks did towards restaurants and the street food scene, right? Those were, for me, kind of respond to post 9/11, where people wanted more casual, but they kind of wanted a better volume, a better value than that they had before. So this really pushed Four Walls Restaurant to compete on that level, right? Deliciousness, right? I don't know, will it be, you know, parlor cooking or cooking out of your balcony and posting it?
Right, or maybe catering becomes more important because people just want to control the environment in which they're in.
Exactly.
I think what's interesting with the food trucks is that a lot of the people who opened them were laid off of their, you know, white collar jobs because of the recession. And so that was their response to try to do something creative and new. So I think depending on how big this recession is, we could see some of that as well.
Yeah, and I think it's a different recession than 2008 all combined, right? This is long, this is difficult, but they're out of the last recession, 2008, the craftsmanship really improved, right? And whether it was beers, or whether it was yogurts, or whatever, honey, you know, there was really some craftsmanship that really. I know this, Amanda. America will keep eating delicious food because people are driven by flavor and driven by some type of social interaction, and they want to post about it. They want to talk about it, right? That is not going to change. How we get there, I think it's too early right now to say it. But you know, making food should not be associated sometimes with money. The whole idea. I mean, I cooked for years and didn't get paid, and I loved cooking, and I love cooking more, you know, just as much today as then. So as long as you can figure out how to connect with an audience, whether it's your neighborhood, whether it's your family, whether it's your extended family, and you can create a business out of that, go ahead. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think to your point about getting to know your community in Harlem better in terms of how big it really was and how broad it is, I think a lot of us who have been sheltering at home are really understanding the restaurant community around our blocks. So as a New Yorker, I would go out to eat every night in a different neighborhood, and now I'm eating only takeout from my own neighborhood, and it just reinforces to me how important those few restaurants are that I'm going to day after day, and like that's what matters. And
And you know how much they appreciate that? They
Yeah.
are like, thank you for doing that. I was speaking to one of our customers today too. She said the same thing. Like, I'm passing it around. I go to the Jamaican street on Tuesdays. I go to the Italian, then I come to you on Sunday. I said, ma'am, I love you, you know, because this is the most meaningful, you know, whatever she spent for her family, you know, 4 days a week. And I was like, so there are relationships being built, and I'm like, I will always remember her, you know. So there's a level of humility and
Yeah.
appreciation that is bigger than ever. So that's beautiful that you guys do that as a family.
Yeah, and I think that people ask me all the time who's going to survive and who's not going to survive, and I think it's impossible to predict. But in general, if you can be vital to your community, and if you can find a way to serve your neighbors, you have a better chance than someone who's a destination restaurant and you're built off tourists or office workers or just people building buzz around you and coming in from outside the neighborhood.
But that's a really important question. Like for me, this is not check or checkers, right? This is people's lives that we're talking about. So,
Yeah.
you know, I think about this as a chef that I worked for a long time and have a platform. And, you know, going back a little bit to the panel, right? I said, you don't understand why this is so important, because there's a lot of marginalized people around the world that look to America, how America's on it. I wish I was coming up, when I was coming up, there was a platform where Black chefs can speak to the chef community in Germany, in Switzerland, in France. There were none of that. People told me, Marcus, you need to lower your dreams, and you should be grateful that you have a job here. Go home. You know what I mean? So it is important, and speaking to, you know, the aspiration and inspiration is very, very important, right? So speaking towards that, like for me, it's, I will do everything I can to make sure that my community will have restaurants, and that's really what we converted Harlem Meet Up to really support that. But also that black chefs has a voice, right? So for example, with the next my book, The Rise, it's 40 African American that have contributed what I think the most to food in this country, from writers to chefs. And out of that, we create a really one scholarship of residency. So people can take pause, a chef can take pause, study, reflect, and then eventually present something the way artists can do it, right? That it was never been around ever, right? So the fact that we can do that is, in this time when it's super tough to do anything, it's a privilege. You have to acknowledge your level of privilege and then figuring out how can you give back. And as a Black chef of privilege, that's my role.
I love that. Well, I'm excited to hear about what happens with it. The book is coming out soon, right?
In October, yeah, so The Rise, and it's amazing. I mean, Mashama, we focus on 15 chefs, like some of you very, very well known, Kwame and Eduardo, and then we focus on some that deserve to be known. So it's just this incredible coalition of amazing professionals.
I love that. I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you so much, Marcus, for having this talk, and also all that you do, especially with feeding your communities with your restaurants. Excited to see what happens with the book and with the IRC and all the good work that's happening there.
Well, Amanda, I'm just glad that we only got one interruption from Zion on this. So,
I do hear my kids having a bath in the other room, and I'm like, oh, I hope everyone isn't going to barge in.
We got ice cream served. He left an ice cream here, so like there's goodies.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Oh wait, sorry, I do see we have a comment. Let's hit one. What is it? This is appropriate. What's it like to be home with your child and able to cook for him during a pandemic?
Oh, it's been awesome. We got a mean scrambled egg going on every morning. Sometimes we even cook the scrambled eggs. Sometimes we just scrambled. And yeah, Zion is now into the egg yolk because that has that beautiful texture that he loves to just like play around with. So it's been great. It's we wake up early. We're excited. It's been fun.
Awesome. And what 2 or 3 restaurants are you excited to go and sit in once we're safely, fully open? Not your own, but someone else's.
Yeah. You know, I can't actually wait to go to see Mashama at Cray. I adore Mashama Bailey. I think she's amazing. And I'm also excited. Always, I mean, if here in New York, for example, I love what Atla is doing in stuff like that. I just think that Daniela is an amazing chef, and I just think that, you know, for me, it's young female chefs with a strong attitude, and you can see it in the food. There's nothing more exciting. I love Daniela's food. I love her attitude. I just think it's stuff like that. It's great.
Love that. And one last one for you. Do you see restaurants becoming more expensive in the next 1 to 2 years to cover all the lost revenue?
I'm not sure if you can make it back by doing that, because customers are going to have a certain level of, you know, they have their budget. So I think some prices will go up. Some restaurants will become more expensive, but you know, that's not for Red Rooster. We can't just charge more. You know, it's just not going to be the solution. You know, we're in the community and of the community, so that we couldn't do that. But maybe if you have a tasting menu that is already at $285, maybe it can be $315. Maybe you have that option. You know, the restaurant's almost broad because so many different variations. So maybe there is a little bit of room for certain restaurants, but for others, there's not.
Right. There was one question for me about what responsibility does food media have in helping bring back the restaurant industry? I think all we can do is report on what's happening out there and try to highlight restaurants that are reopening and what they're doing and the struggles that they're going through and how you can help. I think also that can extend to how you can help feed communities. Food kitchens are really in need of help right now. It's really all going to depend, I think, on if people want to go out to eat as well, and all the ways in which they can do it safely, and alternatives to going out to eat if there are still a lot of takeout options and other ways to engage with restaurant businesses. I thought at first when I saw that question, it was going to be about our responsibility for, you know, highlighting Black and marginalized restaurant owners and chefs. And I think that's a huge responsibility that we have, and that most all of us have been failing on. So I think that's a big project for us to work on in terms of coverage and in terms of hiring and making sure we're doing a better job in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, but I think also, I mean, Vox has done part of that. Is also connecting in many ways. Sometimes people come there through a blog or Instagram, through a story, but sometimes it's also consumer events that could be open for, whether they are virtual or, you know, but it's really connecting, you know, the interested audience with, and then it's a part of discovery, right? So that's really linked to curiosity for the editors, like is the curiosity level. So, you know, when you think about how Eater is built with these local offices, those are key, because it really evens the playing field, whether you're in Memphis or in LA or New York, you know what I mean? Which it wasn't the case before. So I think there's a lot of work that's already gone into that, but of course it can always be done more, and that's an important journey.
Well, and you've often helped us with our Young Guns program, and I think that is a great tool for us, because we don't have to focus on, you know, the upper echelons of fine dining. It's all about who's doing cool stuff at the ground level in communities, and who's coming up, and who do we need to be paying attention to. So I think that's a great outlet for us as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, I think we are out of time, so I will let you go.
Kicking us out of the building
with your kid. I'm sure it's bath time for you as well. So I will go read some bedtime stories. Thank you again for your time and everything you do. Thank you everyone for sending in questions and for watching and listening. And tune into more 92nd Street Y live events.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's all. Bye.